It's been a few Sunday mornings since I have been here. It felt kind of strange just sitting and looking out, and I wasn't just strange looking out over everybody. I have 3 kids dispersed, and I'm trying to make sure they're all staying where they're supposed to be. And if you have at least 3 kids, you know what I'm talking about. You play zone defense at that point. It's no longer man to man. It's a zone that you're trying to keep in order. And so, anyway, thankful for those who are helping us this morning. So faith is a fundamental characteristic of Christianity. That's the way it's described. It's essential that we understand and live as people of faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, our text that we've been studying from time to time over the last month or so, the crux of it, he says in Hebrews 11:6, but without faith it's impossible to please him. For the one who would come near to God or draw near to God must believe that he exists, and he rewards those who diligently seek him. So Christianity is a religion, it is a belief system, it is a faith system, okay? And so as we think about this faith system, as we've been thinking about, Hebrews 11 is probably the chapter that's most commonly connected with faith, a long catalog of things. What we've been doing is just kind of working our way through what's going on. And so you remember chapter divisions, of course, and verse breaks are not, that's not the way they wrote the books. They were helpful additions later to help us kind of navigate some things. And so this whole discussion actually began all the way back in chapter 10 and verse 19. And so we spent some time looking at his appeal for faith. This is a group of Christians who they're struggling with their faith and struggling with a number of different issues that are coming across, whether or not Christianity is the true fulfillment of the Jewish religion and things along those lines. And so he's encouraging them not to go back and not to refuse Jesus because he's the fruition of everything that they've lived their lives for. And so he's making a plea for faith. And then we spent some time looking at faith as a proposition. Okay? When we say faith, we don't mean just believe for the sake of believing. Why do you believe? Well, because I believe. Well, if I tried that with my math professor, I would have gotten nowhere. Okay, I barely got anywhere on my own, much less trying to come up with something like that. Believing something for the sake of believing it, that doesn't make any sense anywhere along the way. And so, for some people, when they look at faith, and it's, to be fair, sometimes it may be how they have faith communicated to them in their lifetime, faith is just faith. It's a natural, it's just belief in something. But biblical faith is not the absence of evidence, but the presence of it. Okay? And so the working definition that we're using is that faith is simply this. It's taking God at his word because God has proven himself to be trustworthy. We do this every day with people. When we call someone, if something breaks in our home, we call someone and we say, I have this broken, can you come and repair it? They say, yes, I'll be there tomorrow. Well, we're taking them at their word. We don't call 8 other people, although I understand modern circumstances, so that has kind of shifted. You get the general point I'm making, though. We take them at their word that they're going to show up. And if they don't show up, we expect them to either A, call and let us know that they're not going to show up, give us a reason for their lack of showing, or to tell us that they've been tied up and that they will make it the next day. The idea is that we live our lives every day taking people at their word. Okay? Now, some people, we know better than to take them at their word. And why is that? Because they break it all the time. They never actually follow through. And so with God, we're taking him at his word because he has a long track record of proving himself to be trustworthy. And so faith is ultimately tied to God who has proven himself to be faithful. His faithfulness, his trustworthiness is the very foundation of our faith. It's the reason that we can have him, is because he has communicated to us very clearly. Now, where we are is we're looking at some of these pictures of faith, and we spent some time in the pre-flood era looking at fundamentals about faith. It changes the way that we worship. It changes the way that we walk with God. It changes the way that we work on God's behalf. Then a couple of, whenever the last time we talked about this, we looked at the patriarchs. Okay, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, those men. And the emphasis of their lives is they embraced promises. They were given promises that they would never see truly, fully fulfilled in their lifetime. But they still chose to trust. that God would keep his word. And so where we are now this morning and this evening, we're going to be looking at the Mosaic dispensation. Under the law of Moses, we're looking at Moses, and then we're going to look at some of the Israelites, and then he's going to move into a summation. That's what we'll talk more about, the summation that he gives tonight. But in this context, it's more about overcoming the world. Okay? 1 John chapter 5, verse 4, or verses 3 to 4. This is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith. Okay? So, how do people of faith interact with a culture of unbelief, and how do they end up overcoming? That's the question. So, as we think about this morning, I want us to break it into, I think there are 3 parts in verses 23 to 31. Okay? So the first one I want us to think about together is found in verse 23, and that is learning to overcome the world even when there is fear involved. Okay? When there is fear involved. Listen to what he says. He says, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because he saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Okay? So, we're dealing with Moses' parents. We're dealing in Exodus 2. And you remember that the decree has come down that all male infants are to be killed because they're trying to stop the multiplying of the Israelites. Okay? And so the text says here, and also in Acts chapter 7, and another sermon that Stephen gives, that there was something beautiful about Moses. Now, exactly what that means has been debated since the time that it was written, to be honest with you. But if you look at the context in which they're found here in Acts chapter 7 and Exodus chapter 2, where Moses is saved by his mother, she hides him for 3 months, and then she puts him in the ark of bulrushes, and then sends him down the Nile River, and then the daughter of Pharaoh takes him in and then hires Moses' own biological mother to be his nurse and to raise him. And so it seems as if, in my mind anyway, this reference to a beautiful child is that God had in some way communicated to Moses' parents that he was going to be a significant man. Okay? Not that all people weren't important, but that God was going to use him for something special. As a matter of fact, in Stephen's sermon in Acts chapter 7, when he's talking about Moses, he says Moses, when he was reached the age of 40, he saw an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, is what the King James says. And so he went over and he tried to deliver him. He killed the Egyptian. And then Stephen adds this statement in Acts 7. He said, supposing that his brethren knew that he was to be the one to deliver them. The implication seems to be that Moses had been taught his entire life that he was going to do something. God was going to use him to do something significant for his people. And he himself was shocked when they didn't realize it, because that's why he had to flee the country. When he saw 2 Hebrews fighting the next day, they said, look, you're going to kill us like you did the Egyptian? And he thought, oh no, the word is out. So now I have to run. So the emphasis here, though, is more upon his parents and not being willing to be intimidated. Okay? Faith is taking God at his word. Okay? God comes to his parents. They give him a beautiful son. They give them a beautiful son, communicate to him in some way that Moses is going to be a significant man used by God at a time when young male children are being killed at birth. So what do? Well, they keep him alive, which I understand some people could say that would be a natural reaction as a parent. You'd still try and keep. I understand that. But they do so for 3 months. They hide him for 3 months until they can no longer hide him anymore. Okay? He gets louder. It's not too incredibly long before he's going to get mobile in some way. Okay? You can't hide him in something when you're going to the market or when you leave the house. And so they're choosing to not be intimidated by the king's decree and to go to extreme measures to preserve his life because God has told them something about their son. So they're taking God at his word because God has proven himself to be trustworthy, which is kind of counterintuitive if you look at it from a human standpoint, because they're right now in Egyptian oppression because they chose to go down into Egypt at the decree of God. So here they're held up to us as an example of faith, of not letting fear run your life. To have faith that's willing to. Now understand this, we're going through Daniel on Wednesday nights and we have talked very clearly about this. This is not going up to powers and authorities and picking a fight. Christians don't do that. Okay? Too many Christians think that they should put their chin out there and they should throw it in the face of the government, and then when the government responds, those Christians want to cry, "Oh, we're being persecuted." No, you're not. You're picking a fight. The people of God don't pick fights. They didn't organize a protest. They didn't try and kill Pharaoh. They simply did what they needed to do to remain faithful. So, for us, what is faith in overcoming the world? One of the world's ways of getting us to abandon faith is by intimidation. It is a very common tactic of the world, intimidation. Okay? If I can just make you afraid, you'll give it up. Whether that be, and it starts, right? It starts way out here on the outside. It will start with a pressure, a social pressure, what is called peer pressure, which, by the way, never actually goes away. Adults do it too. And what is amazing is that we have adults who are afraid to look at someone and tell them, no. Like, I'm not trying to be a jerk about this. You're doing what you choose to do, and I can't control that. And I'm not over here telling you you're awful for doing it. I'm just telling you I'm not going to do it. And I'm not going to be afraid because you don't like what I'm doing. I'm not going to alter my behavior because I'm afraid of your intimidation. And then, of course, it takes on, as it continues to progress, if certain social pressures don't work, then you start amping up the levels. It's the way it's always happened. You can find the theme all throughout Scripture in a ton of different places where the same thing is happening. But as people of faith, it is simply saying, look, God has spoken on something. He has spoken, first of all, that I'm not supposed to live with a spirit of fear. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7, God has not given us a spirit of fear. The idea behind that is timidity, being willing to just hide out in a corner somewhere. But He gave us the spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind, of a healthy mind, of an understanding mind, a balanced mind that can handle situations as they arise. But even if it gets to the nth degree, the highest level of fear is that you're going to threaten someone's life. Okay, most of us, dare say all of us, have never really known what that's like. But what we need to understand is this morning, as we are here doing this in peace, there are people this morning doing this under the threat of losing their lives. There are people doing exactly what we're doing under the threat of losing their lives. People say, why would I keep doing it? Well, look. Jesus said in Luke 12, 4 and 5. He said, do not fear those who once they have killed the body have nothing more they can do to you. Now, if you're like me, you look at that and go, but killing somebody is pretty significant. It is. Jesus is not downplaying that side of it. He said, but you rather should fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Okay, so what is he trying to get us to do? Is he trying to intimidate? Is Jesus trying to coerce us the same way the world is? No, he's just simply saying this. There are people that the worst thing they can do to you is take your life from you. That is the worst thing they can do to you. And after they've taken your life, what can they do to you? Nothing. The soul, the very essence of who you are, they can't touch it. And Jesus has made promises concerning the condition of that soul and the safety of that soul when in His hands. And so I'm willing to pay, is what He's saying. I must be willing to reason this out, that the ultimate price of giving my life, that I would rather give that than forfeit my soul and keep my life, keep my physical life. That's exactly what the three young men did in Daniel 3. They told Nebuchadnezzar they weren't ugly, they weren't unkind. They said, look, our answer is not changing on this matter. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. Whether He will or not, that's up to Him. But we won't bow down to this image. That's a conviction we're willing to lose our lives for. And this is something that has been understood in times of great controversy and crisis. Dr. King used to say, no man has ever truly lived until he has found that for which he is willing to give his life. And how sad it is. Listen, there are people that, when it comes to convictions, we are in diametrical opposition to each other. But you know what? I can respect someone who lives by conviction. The person that is hard for me to respect is the person who simply goes along to get along. Either something is right or it is wrong. At least make a stand. Don't have a spine like a jellyfish. Believe something so strongly that you're willing to dedicate your life to it. That when fear lurks in, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. So what does faith look like in overcoming the world? It refuses to let the world intimidate us. That's why when you read the history of Christian martyrs, it's phenomenal to watch them as these individuals are threatening them with horrendous types of death, and they just look at them with such confidence and calm and refuse to budge. That's faith. Why? You ask yourselves as a human, why would somebody subject themselves to that? Because we believe with all of our hearts that God has spoken. And that God has proven Himself to be trustworthy in taking care of those who trust Him. And that even if that results in the individual's loss of physical life, the soul that lives on eternally is still there. And it is safe in His care. And it is an action of faith. Number 2, we look at Moses, and we see him now as he's grown into adulthood, and he is willing to overcome fortune. Now that sounds very strange to American ears. How do you overcome fortune? Okay? What does it say here about Moses? That when he became of age, by faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to, the reward. Egypt was the world's superpower, and he was in the royal family. There was nothing that would not have been at his disposal. If he wanted it, all he had to do was not even speak, but just make a noise. Why would you leave that and choose to lead a group of people, by the way, that after you've delivered them are going to make your life miserable? Because all they're going to do is complain at you, and all they're going to do is criticize you. Why leave that comfort for this suffering? Why leave pleasure for difficulty? And it's the same question we still ask today. When people look at Christians and they say, why do you not live a certain way? Why do you not do this? Why do you choose a more difficult road than has to be taken? Because I believe something that God has said about where those roads end. Furthermore, I believe something that God has said about the true nature of fulfillment in life, not just after life, but in life. That the true nature of fulfillment is found, the abundant life is found in serving Jesus. Or, as Paul would say about godliness to Timothy, godliness is profitable in all things for the life that now is and the one that is to come. As one writer put it, it's, well, we'll talk about him in a minute. Most people fear losing everything that they have. That's what they're most afraid of. Do you know what we ought to fear the most? Getting everything we want. Now, the reason that sounds strange to us is because we have American dreams. And I'm not bashing an American dream. I'm not bashing. I don't want to live anywhere else. All the caveats, whatever it is we need to hear so that you'll listen to what I'm about to say. How many wealthy people have to end their own lives before we will understand wealth won't make you happy? Robin Williams said, "The strangest and the most unfulfilling thing about fame is that you wake up the next day, the day after the day you became famous, you go to bed that night, you wake up the next morning, and what do you realize? I'm still me. I still have problems, I still have feelings, I still have difficulties. All that I have now is just a bunch of money to go with them, which creates a whole different set of difficulties, because then you've got people that will come into your life for what they can receive from you instead of what they can help you with. Why is it that a famous musician got rid of his phone, won't carry one anymore? He said, because I got tired of every message and call being about, can you get me tickets to this concert? Can you get me in here? Can you pay for this for me? Not once did anybody ever call to simply check on him. And most famously of recent, Matthew Perry, who lost his life. Said when he was young, he prayed for God to make him famous. And when he hit rock bottom, he realized he had prayed for the wrong thing. There is nothing wrong with being wealthy. Nothing. Some of the most godly people I know. Listen. One of the men I grew up with was a venture capitalist. You know what that is? It means he was a guy that was so wealthy, he would go buy struggling businesses, build them up, and sell them for millions and millions and millions of dollars. There's a man in Denver that I know, CEO of multiple investment companies. Listen, other people, millionaires by their mid-30s, not little millionaires, massive millionaires. When I'm talking about this stuff, I'm not saying it because I read it in a book somewhere. These are people that I have personally interacted with and had conversations with, who will tell you it's just money and it does nothing for you. It's just stuff. And yet that's what we try and teach our kids, right? Why was it said to my generation, you got to go to college? Why? So you can get a good job. Why do I got to have a good job? So you can make money. Why? So you can take care of your family and do what you want to and retire. God, seriously. We want our kids to grow up and live a life that all they ever accomplish in their lives is they make some money and they can retire comfortably for 15 years, and when they're dead, what? That's what we want for our kids? That's not overcoming the world, that's being the world. Now, some of those same individuals I mentioned use their wealth for untold good. It's not about how much they can accumulate. Now they're reaching a point in their life. It's about how much they can give away. It's about how many people they can help. Different lifestyles in the world that we can choose. What about the guy who calls late at night and he's sobbing uncontrollably because he's drunk again and he has a problem and he can't get this monkey off his back? It just started as something that was a harmless thing. You know, it's what kids did. What about the guy in the 60s who was married, had 5 beautiful kids, lived in a house then that was probably 3 to 4 times the national average? Had done so well, he gave businesses away to people he knew. Was about to buy an airplane. And he drank every bit of it away. That was my grandfather. His generation has since passed. At his funeral, he died when my mother was 16. At his funeral, and even those later that I would interact with throughout our town, when they knew I was related to him, would always say these words: he was the most brilliant businessman I'd ever seen. How do we overcome the world? The first thing we have to do is realize that the world is lying. What did Moses do? Watch, there's this thread throughout this text that if you'll pay close attention to it, you'll see it. Choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin. Is sin pleasurable? Yes, it is. Why would so many people do it if it weren't? But then he goes on to say, he considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth. He thought that suffering on behalf of God was far more valuable than possessing things. He left Egypt not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured seeing him who is invisible. He said, you know what, I'm not so much worried about what Pharaoh can do to me, because I know there's a God to whom I answer. We can be infatuated, and there is nothing wrong, inherently wrong, with having things of the world, possessing nice things, all these. There's nothing wrong with it until they become the focus of our lives. And that's what Moses said. If I stay here, this is who I will become. that's not who I want to be. God has spoken of a better way. He's spoken of a way that is more fulfilling. So one of my favorite phone calls took place a few years ago. I had left one job and went to another. And so they were having other people come in to go through the process of interviewing and who was going to fill the pulpit next. And somebody called me because one of the men, who is a tremendous man, had interviewed, and the person calling me could not believe that this guy could be so ignorant as to do this. He said, "You're not going to believe this. This guy was a pharmacist and quit being a pharmacist to become a preacher. Why would anybody do that?" Now I'm sitting here looking at the phone going, what am I, an idiot? He had not understood a simple point. There's more to life than just making money. There is. There's more to it. That man did not have to become a preacher. He could have stayed a pharmacist the rest of his life and gone to heaven and been faithful and been a great man. But do you see the attitude that I'm talking about that's so embedded in us sometimes? That it's the ways of the world that are resting within us instead of the things of God. And Moses understood that. He understood the danger of ease, the danger of fortune. And furthermore, he saw who he was as an Israelite, and what God had called him to do was far superior than sitting in a palace. Faith will overcome fortune. Because as one writer said, he said, most people think you will find out who a person is when they lose everything. He said, it's absolutely not true. He said, most people will recover from a devastating blow. Why? Because they honestly have no choice. He said, but for every man or woman who can withstand a tragedy, there are 1,000 people who can't withstand success. Their success destroys them. Because our perspective changes sometimes. And so whatever it is, the emphasis is on keeping our perspective. And the reason why I talk about one side of the perspective more than others is because we are Americans. And if I were in India, I would have to change the application a little. But you know, like I do, exactly what our nation preaches. And we have to be cautious. That's all we're saying. So, the question for us this morning is, are we willing to take God at His word? Are we willing to take God at His word? Are we willing to take Him at His word that I'm sinful? That I need to be penitent if I confess Christ and am baptized in water for the forgiveness of my sins, that He will forgive me? Do I believe God? Do I trust His word when He says, I don't care what you've done. If you seek me, you will find me and you will find forgiveness? Do I believe God when He says, if you're struggling, You come to me and I will help you. That's what God has said. The question is, are we willing to take him at his word? And if he can help us, if we can help you, this is not the only time, but it is a time. If we can help you this morning, we want to as we stand.